I'm Randy Ellis. I'm here today with State Representative Jason Nelson. And Representative Nelson is chairman of the House Budget Subcommittee on Human Services and also heads up a task force that's been looking at DHS and the problems they've been having with an eye toward coming up with some reform recommendations. Could you tell us a little bit about what your subcommittee's been up to and your task force?
The task force was appointed by the Speaker. There's 5 of us. And really the goal is different than most of the efforts in the past. We're not looking at policy reform, we're looking at structural reform for ways, and not just towards efficiency, that's part of it, but it seems like we keep passing reform measures that are sound, but somehow that it's not taking hold everywhere in the agency the way we had hoped it would. So we're left to conclude that maybe there's some structural issues, the way the agency's governed, the way the resources are allocated within the agency, personnel policies, and those kinds of things. So that's the special task force. That's really the goal of it, is to look at the structural changes that might need to take place. We're working closely with some of the newer commissioners, and particularly Brad Yarborough, that Governor Fallon appointed, and Wes Lane and Stephen Dow and Ann Roberts have been very helpful. And so hopefully between those two groups that, you've got people from the far right to the far left on the political spectrum, both on the commission and the legislature, working on this. I'm optimistic we can really get some serious reform done this time.
Good. I want to understand one of the things that has taken place is people have come forward to you with problems, hoping that you can solve them. And one of the reasons the primary reason I asked you here today was I understand that people have talked to you about the death of a 8-month-old in Edmond named Jacob Hedger. Jacob had been taken that morning to his child care provider's home, and that afternoon was taken by ambulance to the hospital after the child care provider couldn't awaken him. And later the medical examiner ruled that he had died from blunt force trauma, and it was a homicide. During the course of that investigation, the older son of the parents was taken away for a couple of months, and I understand you have some concerns about perhaps the way the investigation was conducted or things that were done or could have been done. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough as a legislator. I don't have any formal training in social work, and I try to be as careful as I can when I am in these situations, not second guess what the workers in the field did, because I don't have all of the information. But in this particular case, everything that I have heard from the family of Jacob, who died, and his brother Sam, who was 5 or 6, who was taken into custody, has been absolutely true. I mean, every detail of it. And so there's a lot of things I can't document necessarily, but I'm kind of left to assume those things are true too, in terms of the timeline and the way maybe policy hadn't been followed. And with an agency the size of DHS, that's going to happen from time to time, and I'm concerned this is one of those times. There's 3 of us, Representative Ownby from Ardmore and Senator Frank Simpson from Ardmore, have sought and received permission to look at the confidential case files, and there are things that concern us. The older brother being taken into custody, there was no imminent safety threat there. His younger brother had died, and he was taken away the same day by DHS, and I can certainly understand that night while you're trying to sort out what happened, but for it to go on for 2.5 months when it was clear pretty quickly, within a day or two, that this appeared to have happened at the babysitter's house, and the nature of the injury, the time frame, really made it improbable that it happened any time sooner than when he'd been dropped off at the babysitter's house. And it does a lot of trauma to a child when you take him into custody. And then it was compounded by the death of his brother. His grades suffered at school, and the children of the babysitter weren't removed, and they had a child that was of a similar age to this older brother that was taken into custody, and so it raises a lot more questions than a normal case, and that's one of the things we're trying to look into.
And I understand one of the questions that came up was the babysitter, the child care provider. It wasn't licensed. She wasn't licensed, and her husband was an OSBI agent, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agent. So there could be questions about whether, since they know the Edmond police, about whether that's had any influence on the way things have gone forward. Have you had indication of that in people you talked to?
Well, it's something that I'm concerned about. I don't have any indication that is actually the case, but we're looking into that. I just very recently, the other two legislators and I that I mentioned earlier visited with Stan Florence, the director of OSBI, and raised our concern with him, and that is a possibility. And I was pleasantly surprised that he was already aware of the case and that he had an employee that where something like this had happened in his home. I don't think there's anybody saying that the person that works for OSBI was at home when this happened, but right. To make sure that there's no undue influence or undue deference to the babysitter or her family in a case like this that might get in the way of getting to the facts of what happened to Jacob. I mean, the nature of the injury, somebody did something to the child and it was ruled a homicide, and my interest really is to try to get justice for this little boy, and I don't want any hint of there being influence to prevent a full investigation. I don't at this point believe that's happening, but we're certainly going to follow up and make sure that it's not.
Well, and Edmond police have been a little different in the way they handle this case, because they have not released an incident report to date, which is 8 months ago that this happened, and it's fairly typical that they release incident reports right after they happen. So it's those kinds of things raise concern from a news standpoint. I don't know whether from your standpoint or not, but.
Well, I'm concerned about a number of things, and that's one. This happened March 8th, and we're now, mid-November, and it's really not been in the public domain, really, and that concerns me. What has been happening? I'm always trying to be careful not to get in the middle of a criminal investigation, but I want to make sure that something, that the investigation is moving forward and without meddling in it. And if there is undue influence, we would need to know about it and expose it. I don't know that that's the case, but certainly me and Representative Owen and Senator Simpson don't intend to rest until we know that the investigation is progressing. And
you have seen at least an exchange of emails that indicated that one of the supervisors at the OSBI had asked for the autopsy report, which may or may not be a little unusual. It might be unusual because the OSBI is not investigating the case that I know of, and would have reason maybe to stay away from it since its agent's wife could be
right.
involved.
OSBI doesn't have original jurisdiction in any kind of a law enforcement matter. They have to be requested by a law enforcement agency like the Edmond Police Department. The reality is they've not been requested to help in this case. And when we talked to Director Florence, he assured us that when he first became aware of this months ago, that one of the first things he did was to call the Edmond Police Department and tell them that we can't help on this. If there is a problem with our employee, we need to know about it. And they were proactive and upfront about it. So from OSBI's standpoint, I have a lot of confidence that they're handling this correctly. I have not talked to anybody at the Edmond Police Department. I assume that the investigation's ongoing, but I'm concerned that it's drug on this long, and there really is no public documentation that there's an investigation that's progressing. And so it does make you begin to ask questions and become concerned that maybe there's a problem. And law enforcement communities, a lot of great people, but it's a tight community, and I don't, knowing the character of a lot of people involved, I don't immediately have a conspiracy concern that something is happening, but I certainly hope to try to make sure that's not the case.
I understand there may be some questions that have risen about people who have not been questioned in the case, people who saw the child like the day before, a grandmother, an aunt, that if they thought maybe it happened previous to the child going into custody, you would think those people might have been talked to.
Yeah, I mean there were other babysitters. If the injury to Jacob could have happened any time longer ago than the hour or two before it was noticed he was unresponsive at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and in order to implicate the parents so that their surviving son was taken into custody, then it really opens the door to looking at a lot of other people too. If the timeline for the injury could go that far back, then there's a lot of people that should have been interviewed. I'm not aware that that's happened from conversations with people. So, you know, I can't expect, you know, workers to do superhuman type of things, but when we do have a case like this, to go back and look and see what we can learn from these cases, and to make sure if there was a mistake made, that we learn from that, and if there's a policy that needs to be changed, that we learn from that. And that's really the direction we need to begin to go. And what I found working on the task force and going around the state some, and I've visited with, I mean, it's well over 100 different people from within the agency. Some areas do it well, but the lessons that they learn there and the new ideas they get there doesn't necessarily transfer around the state. And we really need all the workers around the state benefiting from these lessons learned in one part of the state, and that's not happening. How do we find ways to make that happen? This is a prime example where that, you know, we could probably learn from that. And you know, I think a lot of people want to condemn DHS. The problem is that a lot of good does happen, but these cases, we've got to learn from them. And I'm not convinced that that's been happening like it needs to. And, you know, it's unfortunately what DHS is having to deal with is a reflection of where our society and our culture has gone. And you know, we've got a lot of challenges, and this is just one of them.
Anything else you'd like the people of Oklahoma to know at this point with your task force or this case or anything else?
Well, I am asking people to contact me or one of the members on the task force if they do have information that would be helpful to us. If they've seen certain kinds of things that happen, whether it's, you know, a foster family or anybody in the public, DHS workers, you know, other interested people, if they have any information, to please let us know, because we're limited by time and space here, and so we need to hear what other people have to say. We've gotten a confidentiality agreement between the speaker and the director of DHS, Howard Hendrick, to allow us to look at confidential records. So if there is something that we need to look into, we're prepared to do it. We just need input and help.
Thank you for your time.